Hello, EDCI 706, the Fayetteville crew. Dr. Palermo with your week 4 instructional videos, some thoughts about the readings and the work this week. First of all, thank you for a fine time in Fayetteville. I did not do a plus delta as we left on Sunday. I meant to do that and forgot about it. But what to change? Remember, the philosophy of continuous improvement is that we can always do things better. PDSA. We can always improve on whatever practice that we're doing. So with a plus delta, that quality tool, what we ask you to do following a meeting or an event like our class meeting is to give us some feedback. Give me as instructor some feedback in this case. And plus delta is what went well, what would be what should we continue and do again, and delta, what should we change? So in the spirit of continuous improvement, I invite you to shoot me an email or text telling me what y'all are way too nice to tell me lots of good things, so tell me what you would change instead, and I'll work on that. You have a couple of readings to do this week. Hall and Hoard is chapter 4, and I'll say more about that in just a minute. And in your PLC book, you should be reading part 3, chapters 5 and 6, Winter. Now, what about that? The book is structured as if it were a 1-year implementation of PLCs, and we know that we're all in different places, but the fact that it is an annual seasonal metaphor to structure the book, I thought is kind of interesting. So in the winter, we're weathering the challenges and negotiating personalities and conflict, experiencing frustration. No matter where you are in your process of implementing collaborative work through PLCs in your schools, I bet you there's some conflict and weathering the challenges. So again, I hope that you will pick and choose from this book the things that are relevant and needed to move your PLCs forward. But I think that if you don't have team agendas, look at the team agenda template on 111. If you don't have defined roles for your folks in your PLCs, look at the team roles to consider on 114. The managing conflict, or thinking about administrators' roles in team conflicts. Lots of good stuff in chapter 5, I think. So do check out the PLC book, and you're going to be writing about your PLC a little bit this week as well. So a couple of discussion boards, but let me say more about the Hall and Hoard. I introduced this with a brief PowerPoint, and there are 2 different PowerPoints that cover much of Hall and Hoard over here in the resources. And if I can go there now, it's under implementing change. Here are the PowerPoints for Hall and Hoard. If you want to skim and get some background on Hall and Hoard, try these PowerPoints over here in the resource section. That's where I went, and zippity-doo, you remember I kind of zipped through a PowerPoint with some Hall and Hoard concepts and talked briefly about stages of concern. Chapter 4 in here. Well, this section of the book is how we're implementing change and what we can do to clarify the change and to implement it with fidelity. But in particular, I mentioned, I talked about the one-legged interviews, but on page 90 in my book, the question is, what are 3 ways of measuring stages of concern? Well, turn to page 90 if you want the down and dirty. One-legged interviews, open-ended concern statement. Whereas the one-legged interview is really open-ended and just how are things going and jotting down the details. The open-ended concern statement is giving folks a specific, how do you feel about this implementation? How do you feel about this change? How do you feel about iStation? Okay, and so that's open-ended concern statement, and then the stages of concern questionnaire. If you haven't turned to the back of this book, there is an appendix at the back of Hall and Ford that has a variety of different instruments, including on page 309, Appendix A, the stages of concern questionnaire. In answer to this question, there are 3 ways that Hall and Ford suggest that you can gather information about folks' stages of concern. How concerned are they about this change? And oh yes, if they're not concerned at all, it's not going to happen. So, or if they're personally threatened by this, if they're stuck with feeling, how is this going to affect me? What do I have to do in order to survive this change? Then anyway, you want to try to assess how your staff feels about this change. And the stages of concern questionnaire is a 35 question validated tool that you can, or others, researchers can use to assess folks' stages of concern with a particular, with the implementation of a particular concern, particular change. How concerned are they about a change? Right. So that's chapter 4. Read it, please. 3 ways to measure stages of concern. Told you it's on page 90. Check it out. Think about that and respond with, well, just show me that you understand these ways of measuring stages of concern. And I would think about how to implement one-legged interviews or open-ended questionnaires, perhaps in some of your work for your evidences. Don't have to, but that's a tool for you to use, including that very valid 35 question stages of concern questionnaire if you choose. Again, you should be reading Graham and Ferreter PLCs Part 3, and in your PLCPA, you're writing a plan. Well, have you identified a need, and have you thought about resources and suggestions to address that need, and write a little bit about at least one of the priorities for improvement in your PLCP. Please write that in such a way that you can multitask and use that in your OA. And one more discussion board this week, leading others. Collaboration and evidence of your leadership in developing and analyzing the data and writing these evidences is expected. I want to acknowledge that it is much easier to sit in isolation in your classroom and write some of these evidences. It's more difficult to get a group together and to think about a tool to use and to lead that group. It's much more difficult. You can do some of this stuff in isolation. But we ask again that you demonstrate your leadership in pulling collaborative groups together, identifying tools to use to analyze the data, and leading others in analysis and writing the recommendations for your evidences. That's the big idea this week. A little bit of reading. You should be working and writing, working on your evidences, and incorporating what you're learning in the writing. See what you can do here to do a couple of discussion board posts that you can also multitask and work into your evidences. Again, write if you have any questions, please. Text or shoot me an email. I look forward to seeing you again soon, and have a great week 4.